everyone, thank you for tuning in as always. I am Kaylee Batesman, the Content Director at She Can Code, and today we are discussing how you can stand out from the crowd as a female in network engineering. Now, you won't be surprised to hear that there is a shortage of qualified professionals in this area, and because of this, a role in network engineering is a great career option with high rewards and excellent opportunities. But like many areas in tech, it is still male dominated. So how can female employees stand out from the crowd? Now, thankfully, I have the wonderful Maddy Norris, Principal Consultant for Hamilton Barnes, with me today to discuss some of the misconceptions in the sector and much more. Welcome, Maddy.
Thanks for having me, Kaylee. I'm looking forward to it. I'm excited
Yes,
to
thank
be
you.
here.
Thank you for coming along. We're really excited to discuss this topic. We haven't had it on our podcast as yet, so I'm super excited to chat through it with you. And before we get started, can you share a little bit about yourself and your background, please?
Of course. So I graduated from university in 2020. So during the midst of COVID, I was pretty unsure about what I wanted to do, on top of the fact that, you know, everyone's like, you're never going to be able to get a job. And I was like, oh, so I was pretty disheartened whilst on my job hunt. I got a job at Hamilton Barnes. So we're a recruitment agency. We specialise in network engineering, just through one of my friends. So I started on the fibre team initially. I did about 7 or 8 months on that team, and then I moved into IP. So since 2020, I've been promoted 3 times. I'm now a principal network consultant, and I recruit in the IP space for the likes of BT, Vodafone, and different internet service providers UK-wide.
Wow, you've already been promoted 3 times. Amazing. And like many other women, we hear a lot of ladies that fall into tech instead of, you know, choosing a career. Unfortunately, we hear it so often. But yourself, obviously, you fell into network engineering. What exactly is network engineering, and what kind of roles would you expect to find in the sector?
So it's a good question. I had absolutely no idea what a network engineer was. I'd never heard of it. But in my opinion, they are the unsung heroes of the modern world. It's this elusive industry. So basically, your mobile phone networks, your broadband at home, your internet connection to all your devices, they are the network engineers that work on that network. So they design it, they build it, they implement it. So you wouldn't be watching your Netflix without them. You wouldn't be on your Instagram, you wouldn't be WhatsApping your friends, Teamsing your colleagues. So they do play a really crucial role in our modern day life. So within that industry, so in sort of layman's terms, there's network engineers that work on sort of wider area networks. So that would be connecting your internet service providers like BT to your home. And then there's also network engineers that would work within an organisation. So it might be like on HSBC's networks between different branches. Within the actual industry, there's loads of different areas and niches that you can sort of go in and sort of specialise in. So network support engineers, as it says on the tin, monitoring, troubleshooting, supporting the networks. And then there's sort of project engineers who are more focused on sort of building, implementing new networks, network architects, the people that design the networks. And then there's network managers who manage teams of networks. And then there's sort of pre-sales, which is sort of taking requirements from customers, for example, HSBC, and then taking their requirements and then translating them into sort of solutions for the networks so they can then be built. And within that, there's then loads of different niches. So automation, cloud, technical project management. So there's this whole industry with so much opportunity, just waiting to be discovered by females, because there's not a lot.
No, and obviously you mentioned that the way that you came into tech and that you heard about it through a friend. Were there any reasons, why you chose a career in tech, other than the fact, obviously, that somebody pointed out this great opportunity for you? Did you look at the position available and think, actually, that's really good pay, or it looks like there's lots of opportunities there for me in terms of flexible working, or was there something that really stood out about tech for you?
Well, I think from getting career advice of people, I'd been told to go into the tech industry. Obviously, it's one of the most booming industries. There's going to be loads of work there for near and far future. So I think the real appeal to me was the fact that the industry was in such a good place. But then obviously there's really good money in it. I was told that as well. And there's a massive demand for females in general. But I had the misconception that you had to be a techie to go into the tech industry. So when people mentioned, oh, you should go into tech, I thought, oh no, I can't. I was never one to sit there and play with a computer. So I just sort of wrote it off as an option. But then obviously now recruiting within the space, it's opened up my eyes a lot more. There's so many different avenues you can take if you aren't a techie. So you can go into project management, HR, content writing, marketing, account management. So there are loads of different other opportunities if you aren't technically minded like myself.
Actually, network engineer, it sounds technical, and the other jobs that you mentioned within that area, they all sound technical. Are they all non-techie roles?
All the ones that I mentioned prior are all really are all technical, but there's loads of different avenues into the industry as well. So you don't have to necessarily spend 3 years at uni studying. You can get a certification under your belt. So if you do have that sort of passion to go into the more sort of technical side, there are loads of different avenues you can then explore to get yourself there.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's something that we talk about a lot actually on the podcast, that there is such a range of roles within technology, and it does worry people. Like you said, you have that thought, I can't go into the tech sector. I didn't take a computer science degree. I am not going to get on. But as you mentioned, there are so many routes in where you don't have to have any technical knowledge at all, which is the great thing about the tech sector. And also wonderful to hear that even though you graduated in 2020, it sounded like the tech sector was the beacon of light for you when you graduated and thought, maybe I'm not going to get on very well this year. But I'm hoping that the tech sector opened its arms to you, especially as a woman. Did you find it was quite supportive, especially as a woman coming into the industry?
100%. I think that was probably a massive contributor for the fact I did go into tech. I graduated during COVID. Pretty much everywhere else was, majorly affected by COVID. So one of the only industries that was still booming in most areas was tech. I think as a woman, 100%. There's at the moment, just like as a recruiter, and this is when I started as well, finding a female network engineer is like gold dust. They are in high demand. All of my clients are constantly asking me for female network engineers. So the industry understands and recognizes there is a deficit, and they are trying to do things to change that. So I think probably in some ways there have been a lot of indirect benefits for me, I would say.
And it's interesting, obviously, to hear you talk about your career and how you came in, and it doesn't sound massively different to the ladies that you're recruiting. I think that's what we get confused about sometimes in technology, is that the ladies that you're recruiting won't have too much of a different experience to yourself as well. The tech industry is incredibly welcoming. We know that on the inside. I think, as you mentioned, there's that misconception sometimes about people that work in technology, and the lack of opportunities sometimes available in tech, which to those of us that work in it seem absolutely crazy. Do you have any industry role models at all?
So for me, I did think long and hard about this question, but I think for me, my main role models are anyone that works within the space that does things or goes out of their way to encourage young aspiring female network engineers. So for me, we host a podcast here at Hamilton Barnes. It's called The Route to Networking. So we started last July, and then I've recently, probably about 7 to 8 months ago, I started a spin-off series which focuses just on women in tech. We obviously know as recruiters that there's a massive deficit of female network engineers in this space. So we thought this could be, our way of trying to encourage young females or give career advice for anyone sort of looking at it. So I've started, it's an interview style podcast. So we run through their past, present and future, run through career advice, if they've got any useful sources, stuff like that. So I've had all these amazing female network engineers on the podcast, and through each of them, I think they've all brought something different. And to me, they have all inspired me. Not that I'm going to become a network engineer, but yeah. So like, for example, I had one of them, Betty Du Bois. She taught at Wiresharks, which is like it's a network monitoring tool. She used to teach at this convention every year. She felt so grateful for all the female mentors she'd had through her career. She said she'd been really lucky. She had a lot of help and support, and she felt like she needed to do something to give back, because she wasn't seeing a lot of young females joining her class. So she donated £2,000 of her own proceeds to pay for two young females to come to the convention as her sort of way of giving back. I've had, all of them, every single one of them I've had on the podcast actively encourage, women to reach out to them. They all give their social medias. They've all got huge social media presences as well, including blogs where, you can contact them, but they're so more than willing for, that it's such a collaborative industry. They want people to reach out and they want to help the younger generation. So for me, I think they're my inspirations. There are a few more actually, but yeah.
Yeah, it's nice as well that to have that visibility. As like yourself, you said, right at the start, you didn't know what network engineering was, you didn't know anybody that worked in the area, but to keep having that visibility of not just people that work in the area, but ladies that work in that sector is so useful for everybody, and to really drill down into what it is and what type of skills you would need. I'm sure is something that the listeners of your podcast find invaluable. Do you have people on there as well that are, range from juniors right through to senior level? Because that's something that we try to do on our podcast, because I think sometimes there's lots of senior ladies that are, always do interviews and podcasts, which we absolutely love and welcome. But you can't always see yourself in that position, can you? You can't always think, well, there's that CEO or CIO. I can't always see myself moving straight into that position. And if I had just graduated, I would be, you're thinking about the next step. And it's always great to hear from that lady.
Yeah, I think it makes it so much easier to, to see a sort of career path if you have someone that you can relate to. And naturally, a graduate female network engineer is probably going to find it quite hard to relate to a CEO, as you said. So we initially because we wanted to, give people as much advice as possible. So we initially started having more sort of senior network engineers, CEOs, people that were much sort of further on in their career. But we've now sort of broken that down, because we realize, it's better to have a bit of diversity in there, people at different stages. So we now have people that have just graduated, that have gone into their first sort of internship. I've done a podcast with Rita Younger, and then I had her daughter who was 2 years into her networking career on another podcast afterwards. So we do mix it up, because I think, as you said, it's so important to have someone that you can sort of relate to.
And because there's a lack of women that we can relate to in not just in tech, but in network engineering specifically. What misconceptions or myths do you think women have about network engineering? Because there are a lack of ladies out there telling their stories and sharing what it actually is like to work within the area.
Definitely. And I think even now there's been a massive shift in sort of female coding. So there's a lot of females that are now moving into coding and programming, which is amazing. But not as much within network engineering, if not probably not half the amount. It seems to be that women always go towards coding. But I think that the main sort of misconception is the fact that the networking and IT industry as a whole has this masculine stereotype. So when you think of IT, like most people think of men in boiler suits fixing PCs and keyboards and everything else. And
Yes,
it's
the
just
person
not
you
the
see shifting around the office.
yeah, the
That's
IT
it.
support guy. In fact, the industry is not like that. There's so much opportunity. It's a lot more glamorous. You can move into pre-sales and be head of sales for a really big ISP. Like there's so many different areas to it and I think it is this sort of misconception that people have that's stopping young females move into it, because I know for a fact when I was younger, that's what I thought IT was.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. I think in all areas, not just something that sounds as technical as network engineering, but even when I started, when I was younger and I was a young reporter, I never realized that when I fell into technology that I would travel the world as much as I did when I was a young reporter, and how many tech events and conferences that I was allowed to go to. And they put you up in nice hotels. You don't have to stay in some small little shack. You'll go. The tech companies are incredibly welcoming, and have the money available to ensure that your experience is a great experience when you're visiting that tech conference. And it was something that as a young person I didn't realize that opportunity was going to be available to me. That everybody in tech goes to Vegas, or they go to Silicon Valley, and I was like, oh, we all get to go to Vegas, this is wonderful. But
no,
yeah,
it's honestly
something we
incredible.
don't hear about.
No, you don't at all. There's like this whole industry that's just waiting to be discovered. But I think I would say that's the main sort of thing that is putting women off. I think there are a lot of other stuff. The fact that it is already so male dominated, I think, people or females might sort of be deterred, might have like imposter syndrome, which I'm sure most people know, but just feeling out of place or feeling like you don't belong somewhere or you're not good enough for a particular role. And I think that might be heightened as well by there not being so many female figures in leadership and management roles within the industry. There are, but probably not as many as you would expect in other industries. So I think there are other sort of factors. And might think that they essentially can't thrive because they'll be met with a glass ceiling. But I have found from speaking to all of these female network engineers that it's literally the polar opposite. All of them have had male mentors or champions or someone that really encouraged them and helped them through their career and given them guidance. So it is the polar opposite, and it's just a shame that it could be these things that are holding people back.
Yes, yeah, and you mentioned there a little bit about imposter syndrome, which is something that we have spoke about before on our podcast here. Do you find though with something like that, as a recruiter, do you hear a lot of the ladies, they don't always stay? Or do you find that's also a misconception as well, that once, a lady has entered into tech or has entered into a company, actually she doesn't stay there very long because she does feel she doesn't fit in, or she just doesn't fit very well with her team? Is that something you hear, or is that another misconception?
I think that is a misconception. I think most of them that I've spoken to that have opened up to me about this, have suffered at some stage with imposter syndrome and have gone home and thought, I can't do this, it's not for me, I'm out of place. But I think all of them, or majority of them, stick it out because they know the opportunities that are there, and they have self-belief and have just sort of continued on.
Yeah. And so we've spoken a little bit about obviously ladies coming in feeling a little bit out of place occasionally, but as how do you think women, especially those that are just starting out in tech, how can they stand out in a male dominated industry? Is there any advice you would give there?
So I think there are different ways to do it, and it depends on which way you are inclined as a person. I think being very present and vocal on social media gives you that sort of individuality over just interviewing or having a CV. Building out a personal brand, because it is such a collaborative industry. There's so many different platforms, Discord channels, even Twitter and LinkedIn are really big. Reaching out and sort of building a brand from within the space. For example, we had We have Amanda Cow, she's a female network engineer. We've worked with her as a candidate previously. What she does is she's now a content creator for LinkedIn, and she posts videos every Tuesday called Technical Tuesday, which breaks down sort of technical areas in more, and she sort of breaks it down, makes it easier to understand, which is great for us.
Yes.
Yeah, so she does that every Tuesday, and we also had her as a guest on our podcast. She actually posted a video yesterday, and she said that coming on her podcast was one of the contributors that helped her get her job at a major vendor. So they do love to see things like that as well, but then not everyone is that way inclined, and it would be unfair to say that, you know, that's your only option in sort of making a name and getting yourself out there. I think if you are slightly more introverted, which generally speaking some network engineers have a bit of a name for being sort of introverted, I think upskilling is a massive one. Getting certifications under your belt, which is a big thing in the industry. There's loads of different certifications you can get. So I think just upskilling as much as you can, focusing on your unique selling point. So you might have great soft skills, create a career path around that. I think another thing as well that gives women a bit more of an edge over men. Women are more likely to sort of make themselves vulnerable and ask for help, whereas men are sort of less inclined. I think this can, you know, give you a massive advantage, because if you don't understand something or you need help, like, women are more likely to ask for it, and then in turn you're more likely to improve and get better at that. So I think they're my main ones.
I wanted to move on to talk a little bit about, career advice for anybody getting into network engineering sector. But actually, you just mentioned something very interesting there, which ties in with career advice. You mentioned about creating a personality and a personal brand, and not just thinking, I'll just have a CV. That can really make you stand out. It's something that we've mentioned on a previous podcast about CV skills, because I think you were told years ago, never include a picture of yourself on the CV, and your potential employer doesn't want to see your face. And there are certain things that you see as red flags, don't you? But you're absolutely right. If you create a personality around your application instead of it just being a CV, then surely that can only work in your favor, especially as a female in tech.
Of course. And I think, having sort of, if you have been on a podcast, or you do Technical Tuesdays, for example, and having that on your CV as well in sort of hobbies or interests, really puts you ahead. And at the end of the day, most employers will Google you. So if you have content and stuff like that out there, it will, I think it will put you in good stead. But yeah, it isn't for everyone, and there's so many other ways that you can upskill in the industry, without having to put yourself out there and everything else.
Yeah. Do you have any interview tips or pointers for our listeners? Is there anything that you see a lot and you think, oh, how did that person say that? Or that's a red flag? Or, do you warn any of your candidates? Please don't say that when you get through to the next round.
My main interview tips. So I would say just be really inquisitive and ask good questions. So around sort of training, progression, research, obviously it's a sort of given, but researching the company's employees, look at their backgrounds, look at, how they've progressed through the company. And I think another thing, women might be more sort of likely to sort of lack self-belief as opposed to men. Men are slightly more confident, generally speaking. There's a book called Lean In by Sheryl Sandberg, and she speaks about, there's one of her points where she speaks about that if a man looks at a job description and sees 10 requirements and he has 4, he would apply for that role. Whereas a woman would be more likely to look at it and think, oh no, I haven't got those 6 requirements and I'm going to leave it. So I think just having a bit of self-belief in yourself, going for that role, going for that promotion. But yeah, I think in this sort of interview setting, like, don't be deterred if you haven't worked on something, just say, oh, actually, I haven't done that. Don't blag it, don't lie. I haven't done that. However, I've done this, which is sort of, think of a relative scenario. Another good tip, I think, is having a quick sheet of answers. So what I do when I'm sort of prepping candidates for interviews, I always tell them to follow the STAR technique. So it's an acronym that stands for situation, task, action, and result. So set the scene for the interviewer, give a sort of brief, give it the main details that are needed to sort of set the scene. Task, what was the task at hand? Action, what was the action you took to resolve the situation, or and then result, so what you achieved out of that. So I always get everyone to follow that format for like scenario based questions, and sort of have a quick sheet that you've made beforehand. So
that's great advice, actually, because I think sometimes people get very nervous, don't they, going on a job interview. Even if it's the initial HR screening, you're kind of thinking, what are they going to ask me? And you might not
100%.
think, I can prepare with a few notes and cheat sheet of, just to help you through each round. That's great advice. You mentioned there one of your favorite books. Do you have any other resources that you turn to as a woman working in tech? You mentioned obviously you have your own podcast, which I hope you turn to for advice, but any networking groups that you're a part of?
So I think initiatives like this podcast, like the podcast that we run, the Route to Networking. There's another one called The Art of Network Engineering, which is really good. One of my previous podcast guests co-hosts it, Lexi Cooper. But I think for me, the most important source is networking with professionals in the area. So my advice would be, if you are considering a career, construct a template message, just explaining that you're an undergrad or you're graduating in June, looking to get into the industry. I'd really appreciate some advice, and say, would you be free to jump on a call, or is there anything you can share here? I would make a template. I would map out professionals in the area. So do your research, have a little look at, maybe it's females that work for a company that you want to work for, and it doesn't necessarily have to be females, males. I probably wouldn't aim for sending out 50 messages to CEOs, because obviously they're the people that don't have the time for you, but that would be my main bit of advice. Everyone loves the phrase, it's not what you know, it's who you know, but I think it should be, it's not who you know, it's who you can get to know. Putting yourself out there, asking people for advice, like everyone was in your shoes at one point in time. So I think if you sent 100 messages out, you'd more than likely get 30 responses. So I think for me, that's probably one of the biggest sources. There's a few other things as well, like you can join LinkedIn groups, Facebook groups. I know I'm in a few LinkedIn groups that sort of empower women in teleperformance, Discord channels. I recently went to a really good convention as well. It was called Women in Business and Tech, and it was hosted by Karen Brady. Yes. Off of The Apprentice. So I heard a woman speak. Well, I think she was the CEO, she was the founder of, it's called Code First Girls. Have you heard of it?
Yes, I have. Yes. They're a great group.
I heard it. I thought that was amazing. It's such an amazing initiative. It's offering up free training for anyone looking to get into coding. It's not quite network engineering though, so
but a great network.
but an amazing, it's a great place to start. So there are loads of different things.
Did you find going to something in person as well really made quite a difference for you? I think that's something that we lack at the moment. I know things are, they've started back up, but I find that a lot of people that I talk to, they get bogged down in working from home or not going into the city, or they might put on a webinar in the background, and that's kind of, they think that's okay, but it's nowhere near as valuable as making those in-person connections and actually just turning up to a conference and even chatting to ladies in the queue for the toilet. I mean, you never know.
It's the little things. Yeah. No, 100%. I think I'm a lot more of a sort of in-person person. as opposed to over the phone. I remember when I started, I had a bit of a phone phobia because I found it so different just talking to people over the phone. So no, it was great to go and get to speak to people, and obviously everyone's there for the same reason at these events. So it's the perfect chance for, you know, anyone that's looking for career advice or considering like opportunities in the area. It's the best place to do it. Like, everyone's there to network, to answer questions, to speak to people. So I think just the general vibe of the place was, you know, like you could go up to someone and speak to them and everyone was really welcoming. So no, I think in-person conventions, events are so important. I think they're a lot more beneficial as well.
Yeah, and they remember you. You think, oh, I remember talking to
Yeah,
that lady at that event.
exactly. You can actually
Rather
gauge
than,
someone. Yeah.
yes, rather than just, oh, I kind of might have deleted your email or it went into my junk, or
Yeah. Oh, I
they're
think
going to
I've seen your
remember
name pop
you.
up. Yeah, exactly. And then, you know,
Yeah.
you can then connect with them and have a lot more of a warmer relationship over LinkedIn or email, as opposed to, you know, trying to reach out to people over
Yeah.
social media, etc.
Yeah, there's definitely a power in person
Yeah.
networking. We are running out of time, so I've got one question left to ask you. What more can the industry do to attract more women and allow them to thrive? Is there something that you've seen in your experience as a recruiter that you think the industry should be doing more of?
So I think for me, the problem goes all the way back to education and government education. We go to university, like careers fair day or careers fair days, and we do like workshops with students who are network engineers and computer science students, and quite often I'm the only one in the room. I'm the only female in the room.
Yeah.
So it's clear that the problem starts way before university. So in my opinion, I think, you know, there needs to be more done in secondary schools, whether this is through, you know, females coming in and talking about the career opportunities, or just more incorporation into the sort of education system, so you can see what options are out there in the tech industry.
That's great. It's great advice to end on, because we are already out of time. We could definitely talk on this all afternoon, but unfortunately we are out of time, Maddy. So thank you so much for coming in and chatting with us today. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you so much, Kaylee, for having me. I really enjoyed it.
Thank you, and we'd love to have you back again in the future. So we'll definitely get an invite over to you. But
I'd love
to
to.
everybody listening, as always, thank you for joining us, and we hope to see you again next time.